All right. So section 5, there's a page of some information on causality that you need to read. It gives you some vocabulary. And then on this page, obviously, you're not in some groups, so you can't do this. So I'm just going to go through the definitions. It says describe anecdote in your own words, and you don't have the book to look these up anyway. So an anecdote is just a story describing your personal experience. And then it says, why can't we use anecdotes to make conclusion about cause and effects relationships? So these are basically standalone experiences. And then they vary from person to person, and don't give a group comparison. And they don't give a group comparison or account for the placebo effect, which we're going to talk about in a second. So then, describe in your own words what placebo is. So a placebo, that basically is a fake pill, or sometimes what we call a dummy treatment. So it basically, if you have an experiment where you're trying to test a new drug, sometimes they will give half the group a drug that is basically a sugar pill that tastes, looks, smells exactly the same, to see if the drug actually reacts in the person the way they want it to, or if it's just the person thinking that they're getting the actual drug making them change their behavior that's giving them the placebo effect. And so that's what the placebo effect is. Sometimes they see that when the subject experiences an improvement because they think they have the real treatment, but they don't. So sometimes just the mental mindset of, oh, I've got the real pill, makes them actually get better. Okay. What is an observational study? Basically, an observational study is you only observe, but you don't interfere. Sometimes you just gather data, or you ask questions. Sorry, somehow I got on the other page. Or you ask questions. And then an observational study, so you don't choose the groups. I can't spell today. You don't choose, basically who's in the groups or the characteristics of the groups or the characteristics of the participants. And so you're basically only observing data or asking questions, and you just observe. Well, why can't we use observational studies to make conclusions? So your groups might, let me erase this. Groups might have other things in common that are the cause for the reason, or that are the reasons for the cause and effect that we don't take into account. That we don't take into account. And then also, you didn't control the groups. And then what kind of conclusion can we make from observational studies? And the only things that you can make from observational studies are associations. So if I ask you what kind of conclusion can you make, the only thing you can say is association. All right, in a controlled experiment, basically your subjects are required to do something in other words, it's called, they have to basically do some kind of treatment. They have to actually physically do something. Researchers also control the groups. And the groups must be as similar as possible. Okay, and then what are the key features of a controlled experiment? So you have to have a large sample size. You have to have a random assignment of your subjects into a group. You need to use a placebo if possible. And then also, if you can, use what's called a double-blind experiment. And that basically means a double-blind, let me change pen color. That basically means that the subject and the researcher do not know who is in which group. So the only person that would know who is in the group is the statistician. That's the word group. That is taking the data. That would be the only person that knows it. And then the last question says, why is random assignment important in a controlled experiment? It basically ensures all groups are similar. Okay, so for summary, it says of the three methods you just learned, only a controlled experiment can provide cause and effect. That's the main thing. So if I ask you for a conclusion, only controlled experiments. Sorry, I have no more room for the word experiment. So a controlled experiment is the only one that can do cause and effect. Then the only one that can do association is an observational study. And then an anecdote may be convincing on a personal level, but they do not provide evidence-based conclusions and cannot be generally applied. So with an anecdote, there's no conclusion. So the main thing for these is to make sure that you know with a controlled experiment, you have a cause and effect, and with an association, with an observational study, and then anecdote is nothing. Okay, this page is basically the information that we just went over. Controlled experiment definition, the observational study experiment, and the antidotes definition again. So feel free to read through those again, but it's the same thing we did on the previous page. Okay. Number 1, some people believe that wearing copper bracelets can help decrease symptoms of arthritis in the hands. A doctor decides to test this theory by randomly assigning, that's the keywords, all of her patients with arthritis to the hand to wear a copper bracelet for 3 months, 100 to wear a nickel bracelet for 3 months, and the remaining 79 to wear no bracelet for 3 months. After 3 months, she finds that the average pain rating for the first group has decreased by 1.5 points, as opposed to a decrease of 0.3 points for the second group, and no change in the third group. So, because they randomly assigned, that's a controlled experiment. They randomly assigned the subjects. And so a randomly assigned subject, on this one, you can basically do cause and effect. Cause and effect. And so wearing your bracelet causes a decrease in arthritis symptoms. So the answer to that is C. Okay, a professional baseball player is interested in increasing his batting average. He has his best game of the season the day he forgets to shave his face. His teammate mentions a similar experience where he pitched a great game on a day when he didn't have to shave his face. They decide they will not shave for the rest of the season. So this is an anecdote, because basically that's just a story. So an anecdote is basically just a personal story, and so there's no conclusion for an anecdote. So nothing can be concluded because these are anecdotes. And then 3, a traveling agency is putting together a pamphlet for traveling for safety for its customers. They hire a research firm to collect data on a random sample of 300 people who have traveled in the last year. The firm finds that 8.5% of travelers who put locks in their luggage experienced theft all on their trip. 9% did not put locks on their luggage experience theft. So they want to know if that's a controlled experiment or an observational study. And so because they only collected data, this is an observational study. So an observational study, the only thing you could say is an association. However, because the 8.5 is close to the 9, let's knock out the cause. It's one of these two. 8.5 and 9 are close together, so the luggage, using luggage locks is not associated with a decrease in risk of theft. So it would be B. So even though there is an association, that is not, those two numbers are too close. The 8.5 and the 9 are too close together. If they were farther apart, say for example, if I had like an 86% versus say a 9%, then the answer would be A instead. Okay. Educators often believe that wearing uniforms in grades K through 12 can improve academic performance. A state government committee decides to gather data from a random sample. Now, just because it's a random sample of 200 schools, they're just sampling schools, but they're just gathering data. They didn't randomly decide who wore the uniforms or not. They just took a random sample of the schools. So be careful, this random sample doesn't have anything to do with this. They find the average GPA of the students is 0.3 points higher in schools where the uniforms are required. So this is still an observational study because they gathered data. So it says, can the committee conclude that wearing uniforms causes? And it can't cause it, no, because it's not an experiment. Okay, so it's not an experiment. They didn't randomly assign which schools wore uniforms or not. So all they can basically approve, so the only thing they conclude, so they can only conclude there is a slight association. Okay, and it says, suggest something else that the school requiring uniforms might have in common that also could affect academic performance. So these things are called confounding variables. So those are those things that might be a reason for that 0.3 points that are higher. So if they're wearing uniforms, basically there might be higher parent involvement. There's generally more resources in the school because they're a private school. You also might have same-sex classrooms, same-sex schools, less distraction. So those are some other influences that might have a reason for that 0.3 points being higher, and not necessarily that it's only the uniforms that do it. All right, researchers wish to know if drinking green tea can improve skin health in young adults. 300 students from a large university were randomly divided into two groups. The first group drank 2 8-ounce cups of green tea per week for 16 weeks for the fall semester. The second group did not drink any green tea. The skin health expert rated each student's overall skin health at the beginning and ending of the 16 weeks on a scale of 1 to 10. After 16 weeks, there's a 2-point average drop in the skin quality of the group that did not drink green tea, and a 4-point drop in the skin quality of the one that did drink green tea. Because they were randomly divided into groups, this is a controlled experiment. Because they were randomly divided into groups. That makes the big difference. And then what can we conclude? Okay. So basically for this one, the only thing that we can conclude for this one is that drinking green tea, they thought it was going to make it improve. Green tea actually caused a decrease in skin quality. Skin quality health by twice as much. So they thought the green tea was going to make them better, but actually they were both bad, but the other one was twice as bad. So they were worse. Okay. This slide basically just shows you the 4 steps in statistical study. So all of those experiments or observational studies, the questions that we give you, you're basically just going to kind of take them and reword them into these 4 steps. So you're going to basically ask a question that can be answered by collecting data. So like, for example, the one about wearing copper bracelets, all they did was rephrase basically the first sentence. Does wearing copper bracelets help decrease your symptoms of arthritis in your hands? Then the second step is to describe your plan. So the 2 things I want for the plan are your subjects and your variables. And your subjects, she's got 100 patients. And then the variables, you basically need to tell me the 2 things that you are measuring here. And so in this case, they're measuring the pain rating. On this one, I think they're doing the pain rating on a scale of 1 to 10. And it's a numerical value. And sometimes there's 2 things that they're comparing. On 3, you basically are going to give me probably what is in the last sentence of the paragraph or the question, where it tells you what the results were, whatever the numbers are, whatever the data comes back. So basically think of this as the data. This is the who, this is the what, and this is the question. So this is the data that you got. And then this is either, and then number 4 is either going to be a cause or an association associated with it. So that's basically what I'm looking for is. I'm looking for a question. I'm looking for you to tell me who, what you looked at, giving me your data on number 3, and then tell me what this caused this or this is associated with this. Those are the 4 things I basically need. Okay. On this question, this was the GPA question from problem 4, and they turn their question, or they turn their sentence into, does wearing uniforms improve academic performance? And remember, this was an observational study, so we'll need that kind of in the end. And so then your subjects basically were 200 schools that they randomly picked. So that was your subjects. And then your variables, they measured the GPA at each school. And then is that variable numerical or categorical? And so this one, if you're doing your GPAs, that's numerical. And then summarize and analyze the data. So the average GPA was up, I think it was 0.3 points higher when you wore a uniform. Okay. So again, since it's an observational study, the only thing that you can tell me is that there's an association. So for my conclusion, you can say that there is a slight, because 0.3 is not very high, but in the world of GPA, on a scale of 1 to 4, 0.3 sometimes is high. So there's a slight association. That's the only word that I can use, and that's the only one I'm looking for. There's a slight association between GPA and wearing uniforms. You can't say that there's a cause and effect, just an association.